What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the TCG Empire YouTube channel. Today we are taking a look at Red Zoro. I have made the decision, considering the events that are occurring right now. I'm going to stray away from doing the weekly long series on a specific deck with talking about the prices and, how to beat it and the worst matchups for it. Instead, what we're going to do is we're just going to pick a deck. We're going to show gameplays for it for the week. And then the following week, we're going to switch decks, do it again. And that doesn't mean that I'm going to stop doing the What to Buy series. It doesn't mean that I'm going to stop doing the segments as far as, analyzing some tech ideas and stuff. The deck that I focus on throughout the week might change. And if it does change and I talk about some techs, I'll let you guys know. When a new set drops, I'm going to kind of talk about, what to avoid buying, what you should buy, things like that. But it's kind of taken a lot out of me to have consistent uploads every day of something different each and every day, and considering the aspect of what's going on right now, I think it's best that I do something that's a little bit easier on me and doesn't take as much toll and time away from my family. If you guys aren't aware, my father passed away on August 25th, so it's been kind of something new to deal with. And so in that time, I've kind of been taking a break from YouTube for a week and then kind of reevaluating things. So this is the Zoro list that we're taking a look at today. We have Zoro as the leader, 4 Otama, we have 2 Brook, just so that way as we're attacking, we do have access to that minus 2k, which works well with Marco. We have 4 Rush Zoro, 1 Edward Newgate, 4 Curly for search, 4 Jozu, 2k counter you want to play because it does work well with the Marco blocker. We have 4 Makino to power up the 1-drops, the 1 of Marco, that's the blocker. We have 4 Izo and 4 Buggy. Izo is a good searcher because it allows you to thin through and find those Whitebeard pirate cards. Buggy lets you find the events, which work in combination with the Marco. Then we have 3 Tony Chopper. Then we also have 1 Radical Beam, 4 Fire Fist, 4 Guard Point, and then 2 Jet Pistol. We're playing the 2 Jet Pistol just because it is nice to be able to rip the 6k power cards, so it's definitely something to adjust to. So, as always, I want to thank you guys for watching today's video. If you do enjoy it, smash that like button, subscribe, turn on post notifications. Otherwise, I'll see you guys in the gameplay. And with that being said, I want to thank you guys for everything. Enjoy the gameplay, and I'll catch you later. Alrighty, guys. So, we are going to be playing against Smoker, which should be a good matchup for us. The only issue is that we can't really do a whole lot as far as the depleting my opponent of board resources, but it's nothing that's too bad. Considering our start, we do have the ability to play Curly, and Curly unfortunately whiffs, but we do have that Rush Zoro for next turn, which means that we can get quite a few swings through, so not looking too bad at all. So we will do a 5k swing, and then we'll use Zoro, do another 5k swing, and then we can play down the Tony Chopper as well. Actually, you know what? I'm gonna put the Buggy down just so that way I can look for some more cards. Go from there. I could have put the Tony down, but it would just get KO'd anyways. But thankfully with Fire Fist, if they do play down the Kuzon, we actually have the ability to get some extra damage out. So I need to save the Zoro. So I probably should have put the Tony down, but it's nothing that's too bad. They're probably going to play down a Borsalino, which would make sense considering their hand. So let's see what my opponent wants to do. They could also play Kuzon. Okay, so there is the Kuzon, as I thought there was. And we can actually go Otama into Marco to KO the Kuzon. But what I think I'm going to do instead... Oh, man. The Fire Fist isn't really going to do too much. So... let's see. I can utilize less Dawn doing this, so I'm going to get rid of the Kuzan. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do a 5k swing with Curly. My opponent's either going to take it or, you know, drop a card. Either way, it's good for us. And I think I'm just going to turn my whole board sideways right now, because my opponent's going to have to do quite a lot. Okay, so there's the shockwave. That is unfortunate, but, you know, it's not the end of the world. Do another 5k swing, just to keep putting the pressure on that we need to put on. My opponent does have access to blockers as well, so... And then we'll do a 6k swing, and they choose to counter that. So my opponent's hand not looking too big right now, which is good. We want to be able to put as much pressure on as possible, and then from there, kind of formulate the rest of everything. If they do play Kuzan down, we'll be at 8, which means we can go 5, 6, 7, and still have one Dawn to utilize, which means that we're in a pretty good spot. So my opponent goes 8k into the buggy, which is fine. It just means that my opponent gets rid of potential resources, so I'm fine with that. I'm going to play the Marco down so that way I have a 7k attacker, and then we'll just utilize the 5k swings. See if my opponent wants to block. If my opponent chooses to block, that's fine. If they want to dump a card, okay, so they choose to take it, and in this case, we can go 6k, which means now my opponent chooses to take it, which is fine. I am not too concerned with that. My opponent does have 7 cards in hand, so I am going to have to be kind of picky with how I go for lethal, just keeping that in mind. But thankfully, if my opponent does want to kind of get rid of cards, we do have the ability to kind of get rid of that. And if my opponent chooses to power up the smoker, use its effect, we can actually just block with the Tony Chopper, which means in turn, my opponent doesn't get a real plus out of it. I get a block, so I get to save myself, and I also get to kind of protect everything. So my opponent plays down Isho for 8, which is interesting. And there's a 7k swing. We'll just get rid of the Tony just so that way my opponent can't benefit next turn from giving everything -1. Now he does have the Isho, but it's not too terrible. Now I apologize if I do sound a little bit weird. I'm a little bit sick right now, so it's kind of iffy. So we actually do draw the Edward Newgate, which makes things a lot better for us. So we can actually do a 6k and do a 7k swing. So I think that's what we're gonna do. Actually, correction, we can do a 7k into an 8k. So what we'll do first is we'll do 8k into the Borsalino, force my opponent to either block. If they choose to block here instead of dump cards, then we have a 7k swing onto the smoker, which means that with the smoker, we have access to force my opponent to potentially dump a ton of cards. And we actually, like I said, we do have the Edward Newgate, which means that my opponent's damage this turn is going to be a little bit more awkward than anything, but we actually have a decent chance. And the nice part is, if they do deal damage to us and we do rip Fire Fist or we do rip Jet Pistol, we can get rid of this Borsalino since the +1k only happens on our turn. So with the red matchup, you kind of have to be weary as black, depending on how aggro they are. I mean, as you guys can see right here, we're really in a spot where we have basically 5 life left. My opponent has 1, and we still have time to, you know, take life and things like that. My opponent has 1 blocker, so there's the Sakazuki. My opponent is going to get rid of the Marco, which is fine. I'm not too worried about that. My opponent is only going to be able to swing with the Isho now, though. And the Isho swing, that's fine. And we do actually get the Jet Pistol, which means we can KO the Borsalino. And then we actually might have access to lethal next turn. Considering my opponent's board. I am going to get rid of this Kuzan just so that way next, if they do survive this, it's not too terrible. And then we'll actually put, let's see, right now it's at 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. We'll just go 15k, pop the Kuzan, and then my opponent has to have all of the possible 2ks. So my opponent wants a rematch, so let's head right into the rematch. So with this, we're going to go second again. Looking at this hand, that hand is actually really nice considering the fact that once we hit a couple turns, we're actually in a super solid spot to be able to start putting super insane aggression. So we'll see if my opponent can deal with all of the aggression that we want to do. So my opponent goes for an 8k swing. Very respectable. Let's see, considering this, what we'll do first is we'll use the Ezo, see if we can get a card. So we do get Fire Fist, which means that we do have the potential to KO and go from there. And then we'll just swing 5k, and then we'll place another Zoro down. Placing the Ezo down was a little bit risky in the sense that it can give my opponent the buff. But I do have stuff to out combo in my hand, and I wanted to be able to search, so potentially get a guard point, things like that. So my opponent just swings 5. That 5k swing, we'll just get rid of it. I should have gotten rid of the Makino instead, but it's all good. So my opponent is going to activate Garp potentially, which means he does have to turn it sideways. And if my opponent chooses to do that, we're in a super solid spot, because that means that we can actually put way more aggression on. And we do have access to Jet Pistol as well, which means that we can go like this. We can Jet Pistol the Garp, go 1, play down the Makino, and now we have 2 6k swings, put even more pressure on. And the next turn will be at 8, which means that we can play down the Zoro, potentially the Marco as well, and we have a couple Whitebeard cards in hand. So my opponent accidentally discards 1 card that's 1k to put him at 6 in order to block, but as we all know, within One Piece, if you are matching the powers, you still take the damage. So my opponent's hand getting pretty big. He does have 7 cards again, so see what my opponent chooses to do. So there's just a 5k swing, completely fine. Getting rid of the Ezo. There's the Sakazuki. So my opponent is going to dump quite a bit of cards, and considering our hand, I think I'm just gonna do a... I'm not at 2 life, so I can't benefit from the Marco, so I think I'm just gonna do... Let's see. I think I'm just gonna do a 9k into a 7k swing. I think that's probably the best thing for me to do. Put on as much aggression as possible. Make it to where my opponent has to find a blocker next turn, and, you know, deal damage to this Zoro character rather than dealing at my life, which means in turn I have time to kind of build. And next turn I do have the Edward Newgate as well, which means that my opponent's going to have even more swings go through. So definitely not bad. So there's a 7k swing. Sadly, we can't block that, so we just have to let it go. And there is the Smoker. So Smoker is just swinging 6k, completely fine. And my opponent is probably going to activate Isho here. Oh, okay, so there's Borsalino. And we'll see what my opponent wants to do. If my opponent doesn't play another character, I'm not in lethal range next turn. Which means that I can get away with quite a bit. Let's see. If I go Edward Newgate, then I place down Chopper. 7k swing here. My opponent has to block. I'm still in a super solid position, so... even though it's counterintuitive, I'm going to play down the Chopper. I know my opponent can get the buff, but I want to be able to kind of survive the next turn, take as little amount of damage as possible. And we do have 2 1Ks that we can get rid of if necessary. And if my opponent decides to play down the Sakazuki. Okay, so there's the Kuzan. Interesting that my opponent chose to go for the Kuzan. It means that my opponent's not going to be able to... he can try and deal 1 point of damage, but that's about it. I'm probably going to let the 1 go through, just because then Marco is active, but at the same time, my opponent seems to forget. So there's the Sakazuki down, so my opponent does have a big lethal next turn. What I think I need to do is Curly to Dawn, and I need to try and get rid of at least one of my opponent's characters. Let's see. So we use the Curly. Curly is going to, unfortunately, not get us too much. We do have access to Buggy, which means that we can find potentially a counter card, but unfortunately we don't have that either. I think exactly what we're going to have to do is just play down the Marco, and from here, we're just going to have to go for... I can't KO any of his board. He turns all of this sideways. This I take, this I take, this I take. Oh, it's so awkward. Okay, we're just going to do a 7k swing to force the block. My opponent lets it go, which is perfectly fine. It means that Marco's safe right now. If my opponent KOs the Marco, that's less Dawn that he has to work with. And if I end up surviving, then I have the chance to actually deal with the blocker or getting through it. So, looking a little bit dicey, but again, it's not too insanely terrible. So, I think we're going to be in a fine spot. If my opponent plays down something like that 10-drop Kuzan again, it'll be really awkward, but considering everything, we should be fine. I can bring back the Marco by getting rid of some cards, so my opponent plays the Borsellino for 4. There is the Meteor Volcano, and my opponent decides to pass, which is interesting. So we do have access to actually quite a lot this turn, and I think we actually might have the chance to win. So this is what we're gonna do. We'll do a 6k swing. The way if my opponent chooses to block, he has to protect himself. And then with the Edward Newgate, let's see. We'll do a 6k swing here with the under the smoker. My opponent dumps another card. So what I need to do is I need to get 2 of these blocks out of the way. So this is what we'll do. So this is a 6. So we'll go Zoro. So that's 6, 7k right now. So that means my opponent would have to dump both cards. My opponent chooses to block. And then considering my opponent blocked a 7k, I think what we can do is go 9 into 11. Because now my opponent has to block, and then we have an 11k swing. My opponent doesn't have any cards. So, with that being said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's video. Did enjoy it, smash that like button, subscribe, turn on post notifications. We're going to be going on a new route, as I said in the beginning. We're going to just be doing some deck battles, going from there, and seeing what we can do. But again, thank you guys for the support, and I will catch you guys in tomorrow's video.